You know, empires don't just collapse in a day. It's more like a slow rot from the inside, while everyone's too busy scrolling to even notice the warnings. Seriously, America's debt is bigger than any empires in history. We're talking $35 trillion and it just keeps going up. Our life expectancy is actually dropping, and almost 40% of kids are failing to read at their grade level. Nobody trusts the government any more less than they did during Watergate. And for the first time, people our age and younger think the future is going to suck more than the past. This isn't just a slump, it's a full-on collapse. But it's happening so slowly we can pretend it's not. So let's just break down the 10 undeniable signs that prove America is the next empire to fall. And the crazy thing is, it's not some future prediction, it's happening right now. Number 10. Our whole idea of money is a complete joke. I mean, we need to stop acting like a dollar today is anything like what it was for our parents, because it's not even close. The entire financial system is so disconnected from real life, it feels less like an economy and more like they're just carefully taking the whole building down. As of 2025, the United States is in the hole for over $35 trillion in national debt, a number so mind-boggling that if you stacked it in $100 bills, it would stretch all the way to the moon and back 7 times. And the wild part? None of the politicians are even faking that they have a plan. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office is projecting we'll just add another $20 trillion by 2035, with what we pay in interest alone costing more than the entire defense budget. Let that sink in. We'll spend more just on our credit card bill than on maintaining the biggest military on the planet. But what's really insane is how it hits regular people. 63% of us are living paycheck to paycheck, and over half of Americans have less than $500 stashed away for emergencies. That's not some soft landing they talk about on the news. That's the ground rushing up to hit us. And the stock market? It's a rigged casino. Nearly 89% of all stocks in the U.S. belong to the top 10%. Meanwhile, the bottom 50%, you, me, the people who actually work for a living, own less than 1%. The average person isn't participating in the economy, they're just propping it up by going into debt. We've built this total fantasy world of money, fueled by artificially cheap loans, endless bailouts for the rich, and a Federal Reserve that printed 80% of all U.S. dollars that have ever existed in just the last 5 years. Yeah, read that back. 80%. And where did that cash go? Not to our schools, not to fix our bridges, not to healthcare. It went directly into the bank accounts of people who already own stuff, hedge funds, mega banks, private equity vultures. You ever wonder why a normal 3-bedroom house in the suburbs now costs 7 times the average salary? It's because the whole system has been turned into a game for the investor class. This isn't capitalism. It's a new kind of feudalism based on debt, and the peasants are us Millennials and Gen Z, maxed out and stuck with a combined $1.77 trillion in student loans. Empires fall apart when the math just doesn't work anymore. And in America, the numbers stopped making sense decades ago. We've just been ignoring the invoice, but that bill is coming due, and it's not going to be paid in dollars. It's paid in broken families and towns with shuttered factories, and in millions of us working 2 jobs just to afford a studio apartment. That isn't stability. It's decay. Number 9, the nation's health is quietly circling the drain. We don't talk about this enough, but America's collapse isn't just financial, it's biological. The country is, quite literally, dying younger, getting fatter, and feeling sadder than it has in a century. In 2024, the average American life expectancy fell to 76.4 years, the lowest it's been since 1996, according to the CDC. At the same time, countries like Japan, Iceland, and Switzerland are seeing their people live past 84. But this isn't just about the number of years, it's about the quality of those years. America has the worst obesity rate of any developed nation, over 42% of adults, and it's getting so much worse for kids. Nearly 1 in 5 American kids is now obese, which is setting the stage for a massive wave of chronic diseases by 2040. And let's be real, this isn't just about personal choice. The whole system is broken. The U.S. spends over $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare, more than any nation in history, but we only rank 38th in the world for how well it works. Why? Because it isn't healthcare, it's sick care. The industry profits when people stay sick, not when they get well. That's how pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson managed to rake in over $100 billion in profit last year. All while insulin costs have tripled, and the wait lists to see a therapist can be 6 months long. It gets even darker. Suicide is now the second biggest killer for people between the ages of 10 and 34, and over 1 in 6 Americans is taking antidepressants, with most staying on them for more than 5 years. And let's not forget the opioid epidemic, which took over 100,000 American lives in 2023 alone. It's been fueled largely by fentanyl and a painkiller system that was basically designed by pharmaceutical executives to get people hooked. An empire is done for when its own people lose the will to keep going, when their health becomes a commodity and their suffering becomes background noise. A collapse doesn't knock, it just seeps in through the cracks. America's failing health isn't just a public issue, it's a national security threat. A nation that's too sick to work, too addicted to function, too depressed to have hope, and too broke to get help isn't a superpower. It's a liability just waiting to blow up. While China and Europe are investing big in preventative medicine and taking care of their elderly, America is still stuck arguing over whether healthcare is a right or a privilege. Ancient Rome had lead pipes poisoning them. We have seed oils, big pharma, and a food system built on corn syrup and despair. If that isn't internal decay, I don't know what is. Number 8. A generation that can't afford to exist. The American dream is mathematically out of reach for the generation that was told to go after it. Millennials, born between 1981 and 1996, were promised a world of opportunity. Instead, we got handed the worst financial start of any generation in modern history. When you adjust for inflation, our wages have barely moved since the early 1980s. Meanwhile, the cost of housing, education, and healthcare has exploded by over 600%. As of 2025, the average house price in the U.S. is $417,700, according to the Federal Reserve. But the average millennial income is only around $47,000. That's not a path to homeownership. That's a lifetime of renting from a corporation like BlackRock and praying your landlord doesn't sell. And don't even get me started on kids. The average cost to raise one child to age 18 is now $310,000. In most big cities, daycare costs more than tuition at a state college. So is anyone really surprised that the U.S. birth rate just hit a 50-year low? Millennials aren't just broke, we are exhausted. Most of us are drowning in debt, working unstable gig jobs, and just watching that ladder of opportunity get pulled up from under us. Over 60% of millennials couldn't even afford a $1,000 emergency, and nearly 40% say they will probably never be able to retire. This isn't about being lazy, it's about being abandoned by the system. The generation that rebuilt this country after World War II got the G.I. Bill. Affordable housing, stable pensions, and a ton of factory jobs. Millennials got predatory student loans, contract work, and a lecture about grind culture. And Gen Z, you guys aren't even bothering with the game. You're watching it all fall apart in real time, the climate, the economy, democracy, and asking, what's even the point? And honestly, can you blame them? You can't build a future if you can't afford an apartment. You can't start a family if your rent takes up 60% of your income. And you can't save a country if the next generation is too burned out to even try. Empires don't fall when they lose land. They fall when they lose hope from within. And today, for the first time ever, the majority of young Americans believe their future will be worse than their parents' was. That isn't pessimism. That's a prophecy. Number 7. The total collapse of the American family. Let's talk about something that's not in the headlines but really should be, the complete breakdown of the family in America. Because while empires can die from wars or economic disasters, they also die a slow death from the inside, when their most basic unit, the family, stops working. Back in 1960, almost 73% of homes were run by a married couple, and nearly half of them had kids. Fast forward to now, and married households have cratered to just 45%, with only 17.8% having kids. That isn't a minor trend. It's a massive cultural breakdown. And it's not just about who's getting married. It's about the simple disappearance of a stable family life. According to Pew Research, the United States now has the highest percentage of single-parent homes in the entire world, and it's not even close. 23% of American kids live with just one parent, compared to 12% in the UK, and only 3% in China. So why is this happening? It's not just cultural shifts, it's economic warfare on the family. In a world where paychecks haven't really grown for 40 years, both parents have to work just to get by. That leaves no time, no energy, and no stability to raise kids in a solid home. Daycare now costs an average of $15,000 a year for one kid, and nearly 50% of counties in the U.S. are considered childcare deserts. That means millions of families are forced to choose between earning money to feed their kids and actually being there to watch them grow up. It's burning everyone out. American parents report the highest levels of stress and burnout in the developed world, and the children, they are not okay either. Teen depression, self-harm, and suicide rates are all climbing at a terrifying pace, especially among teenage girls, where ER visits for suicide attempts are up 50% since 2019. The American family has been cornered financially, isolated socially, and broken apart culturally. And since the village it takes to raise a child doesn't exist anymore, families are collapsing under a weight they were never meant to carry alone. You cannot build a lasting civilization when the next generation is being raised by screens, fast food, and parents who are never there. When kids grow up without stability, safety, or role models, you don't just lose a generation, you lose your entire future. And no empire, not Rome, not Britain, not America, can survive that. Number 6. The rise of the unaccountable tech elite. We are now being ruled by people you didn't elect, by algorithms you can't understand, and by corporations you couldn't find on a map. The collapse of empires. Look, this always goes hand in hand with power that has no one to answer to, and in 2025, America has pretty much been taken over by the tech giants. Let's be real. Google, Amazon, BlackRock, Microsoft, Pfizer, and Meta have more sway than Congress now. I'm not being dramatic. It's a literal fact. Just take BlackRock. They manage $10.5 trillion in assets across the globe. That's more cash than the GDP of every single country on the planet except for the US and China. They have so much capital that entire governments have to bend their policies to whatever BlackRock decides to invest in. And while Congress is busy with their political drama, these huge corporations have woven themselves right into the government. Amazon is handling logistics for the Pentagon. Google has AI contracts with the Department of Defense, and Pfizer, whose board is filled with former FDA and CDC execs, pulled in $100 billion in revenue from COVID. Then they turn right around and use that money to lobby for vaccine mandates all over the world. They're not just companies anymore, they're shadow governments. And the average person, you're being run by apps, policies, and digital systems you had zero input on. You don't get a vote on Google's search algorithm. You don't get to elect the CEO of OpenAI. You can't even opt out of being watched anymore. Between Amazon's Ring doorbells, Facebook's ad targeting, and TikTok's data mining, everyday life has turned into this massive system of behavior control. And this isn't just some theory. In 2024, for the first time ever, AI-generated content online outnumbered stuff made by actual humans, flooding everything with fake narratives and deepfakes. And all this politicized propaganda. So while we're all down here bickering about pronouns or some politician, the people with the real power are hiding in the code, controlling what we see, what we spend money on, and even messing with elections, all without ever having to face the public. Every empire finally collapses when its leaders are completely out of touch, when the people in charge don't feel any connection to the people they're supposed to be governing. In 1776, it was kings. In 2025, it's billion-dollar algorithms and boardrooms full of executives who haven't paid taxes in a decade. And the tragic thing is, the whole American system was set up to prevent exactly this. Checks and balances, 3 branches of government, transparency, none of that matters in a world that's run by the cloud. And we just handed them the keys ourselves, all for free shipping, convenience, and 24-hour dopamine hits. That's not freedom, that's just corporate feudalism. Number 5, military decay and endless wars we never win. Empires always end up dying on the same sword they used to conquer with, and for America, that sword is its military. But let's get one thing straight. This is not the military from World War II, Korea, or even Desert Storm. This is a massive, bloated imperial machine so overextended and unaccountable that it's basically just feeding on itself now. In 2025, the United States is spending $886 billion on defense. That's more than the next 10 countries combined, and that includes Russia, China, and the UK. But what are we getting for that almost $1 trillion a year price tag? It sure as hell isn't peace. We're not getting victory, and we're not even getting security. Instead, we're fighting proxy wars in Eastern Europe, running secret ops in Africa, funneling billions to Israel, keeping troops at over 800 foreign bases, and we're still stuck in that paranoid post-9/11 mindset. That's what lets the government spy on its own citizens. And let's be honest, the US military hasn't actually won a major war since 1945. Vietnam was a complete disaster. Iraq cost over $2 trillion, destabilized the entire Middle East, and gave birth to ISIS. And Afghanistan was the longest war in US history. 20 years, all for the Taliban to just take the country back in 11 days. But you know who did win? Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. That military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about is no longer just a warning, it's become an empire within an empire. These companies rake in billions whether we win or lose, and they've got their interests so tangled up in Congress that nearly half of all retiring military generals go straight to work for them as lobbyists or consultants. We've literally created a system where constant war is the business model. And while all that's happening, our actual defense is falling apart. Recruitment is at an all-time low, our military readiness is shot, and suicide rates among soldiers are higher than combat deaths. This isn't strength. It's a classic case of an empire stretched too thin. We're out here trying to police the entire world while our own cities are rotting. Our bridges are falling apart, and veterans are sleeping in tents under overpasses. Rome did the same thing, you know. They expanded so much for so long that they couldn't even defend their own home. And just like Rome, America now confuses spending a ton of money on the military with actual national strength. But strength isn't about how many missiles you have, it's about having a purpose. And we've completely lost ours. Number 4. The total collapse of trust. A nation that doesn't even believe in itself anymore. There's this one thing that historians always come back to when they study the fall of every great empire. But it's never the big headline. It's trust. Not trust in leaders or banks or even in the laws, but trust in each other. And right now, the United States is watching that final thread just snap in real time. As of 2024, only 4% of Americans say they trust Congress. 4%. That is lower than the approval rating King George III had during the American Revolution. And it doesn't stop there. According to Pew Research, only 20% of Americans trust the federal government to do what's right most of the time. That number used to be over 70% back in the 1960s. And what about trust in our elections? After the last presidential race, 40% of the country is convinced the 2020 election was rigged, and they don't care what the evidence, the courts, or any audits have to say. On the left, a lot of people are sure that voter suppression, gerrymandering, and the Electoral College are rigging the results. On the right, there's a deep belief that the system is riddled with fraud, corruption, and shady globalist plots. And you know what? They're both right. Because when both sides feel like democracy is a total sham, the system is already dead. But it gets even darker. Social trust, that basic feeling that your neighbors, your coworkers, your fellow citizens are generally good people, has completely vanished. A 2023 poll from the University of Chicago found that Americans now see people from the other political party as a bigger threat than foreign terrorists. Let that sink in for a second. We've become a country where an ideological civil war is just considered normal. A country where family members refuse to speak to each other, where every single conversation is one wrong word away from a total meltdown. This isn't just a culture war anymore. This is the death of our civic life. And here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. America could survive an economic collapse. It could probably even survive a military defeat. But what it can't survive is a society where nobody believes in the project anymore. Rome didn't fall the day the barbarians broke down the gates. It fell when Roman citizens stopped calling themselves Romans, when their identity broke apart, when their whole purpose just disappeared. That's where we are. There's no shared mission, no common goal for the future. Just red states and blue states screaming at each other in their echo chambers, while the very foundation of democracy quietly turns to dust under our feet. You don't need a foreign enemy to bring down America. We're already doing it to ourselves. Number 3, the currency collapse. Faith in the dollar is disappearing. Every single empire in history had a symbol of its power. Rome had its silver coin, the denarius. Britain had the pound sterling. And for nearly 100 years, America has had the almighty dollar. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody on CNBC wants to say. The world is starting to look for an alternative. You've heard that the dollar is the world's reserve currency, but what does that really mean? It means 60% of all the reserves that global central banks hold are in dollars, and 90% of international trade is still done using greenbacks. But in 2024, for the first time in almost 80 years, you can see real cracks forming in that foundation. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are actively working on alternatives to using the US dollar for their trade deals. Russia and China already do more than 90% of their trade using their own currencies, the yuan and the ruble. And in August of 2023, BRICS officially invited Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to join them. That creates a massive bloc that produces a huge chunk of the world's oil, grain, energy, and rare earth minerals. And every single one of them is looking for a way to trade without the dollar. So why does this matter? Because the entire American financial empire is built on one very fragile assumption, that everyone will have to keep using the dollar no matter what, that we can just print money endlessly, borrow without any consequences, and run trillion-dollar deficits because the world has no other choice. But what happens when it finally does have a choice? What happens when oil starts getting sold in yuan? When digital central bank currencies let countries skip the SWIFT system? When all the nations under US sanctions, and there are over 30 of them, create their own payment networks? The answer is that America loses its magic trick. We can no longer afford to fund wars, hand out stimulus money, and kick the can of collapse down the road with cheap debt. The interest we have to pay on our national debt will skyrocket. Foreign countries will stop buying our treasury bonds, inflation will speed up, and the Fed, which is already holding $8 trillion on its books, will have to print even more of our debt into existence. That's what pushes us into the final death spiral of our currency becoming worthless. You think inflation is bad now. Just wait until the rest of the world completely loses confidence. When Rome devalued its currency, it took 300 years for it to fall. If America breaks the dollar standard, we're not going to get 3 decades. We'll be lucky if we get 3 months. The dollar isn't just a currency. It's the entire scaffolding holding up this empire, and that scaffolding is starting to creak. Number 2, the education crisis. A civilization that can't teach its own kids how to build a future. You want to know how empires really die? It's not just from debt or war or famine. It's when they can no longer teach their own children how to be better than them. And right now, the United States is failing that test in a spectacular fashion. The American education system used to be the envy of the entire world. Now, it's producing a generation that is less skilled, knows less, and is less hopeful than any other in modern American history. And I have the brutal data to prove it. According to the 2024 Nations Report Card, reading scores for U.S. 8th graders have sunk to their lowest level since 1998. Look, math scores are at a 20-year low, and not even 30% of kids in public school are any good at science. That's not just a red flag, that's the whole system crumbling in real time. But it gets so much worse. We're literally making future progress unaffordable. College tuition has gone up more than 1,200% since 1980. That's way more than inflation, our paychecks, or even healthcare costs. Right now, the average person's student debt is around $37,038, and the country's total student loan debt has exploded to over $1.77 trillion. And what are kids getting for all that money? They get degrees that don't even promise a job anymore, employers who want you to have experience for a job that's supposed to be entry-level, and this whole gig economy where you see 30-year-olds with master's degrees driving for Uber just to cover rent. Basically, we've just built a system that churns out debt slaves holding diplomas. They've trained us not to really think or create, but just to do what we're told. Meanwhile, other countries are flying past us. China's graduating 4 times as many students in science and tech fields as the US. Every single year. Kids in Finland are always in the top 5 in the world for reading, math, and science, and they do it with no standardized tests, no homework if you're under 13, and 0 tuition fees. But here, American schools are installing bulletproof doors, rationing printer paper, and making teachers work 2 jobs to get by. And we act surprised that we're running out of teachers. We're spending more on our prisons than on our schools, more time arguing about banning TikTok than funding job training programs. And while our classrooms are falling apart, our politicians are busy debating book bans and bathroom signs instead of fixing literacy rates or getting everyone decent internet. Any empire starts to fail the second it can't raise a generation that can handle taking over. And in 2025, it feels like America is telling its kids to hold up a burning empire without even giving them fireproof gloves. You don't need bombs to bring down a country, all you need is ignorance, apathy, and a chalkboard covered in dust. Number 1, moral collapse. When a nation completely forgets its own purpose, that's it. That's the final, fatal shot that every collapsing empire ends up firing at itself. It's the loss of a moral compass. Because in the end, empires don't just fall apart from a bad economy or a lost war. They implode when they can't even answer the most basic question. Why do we even exist anymore? And right now, America can't answer that. Not honestly, anyway. Not together, and not with any real confidence. This country used to be all about shared values, freedom, justice, opportunity. Now, in 2024, it's just turned into this polarized, dopamine-addicted circus of nothingness and distraction. We live in a country where there are more mass shootings than days in the year, where people scroll past videos of genocide squished between gym selfies and ads for stuff they don't need. The line between politics and professional wrestling has just been completely erased. We now look up to grifters, influencers, and billionaire trolls as our thought leaders, while the term public servant has become a total punchline. And don't get it twisted, this isn't just culture getting worse, it's the final sign of a country that's spiritually exhausted. Because when you hollow out a society, when you get rid of their sense of community, take away any chance of meaningful work, bury them in debt, trap them behind screens, and teach them that the only thing that matters is their net worth, you don't create revolutionaries. You just get worn-out consumers hoping for social media likes and lottery wins. We're a nation that has forgotten how to feel, how to grieve, how to dream, or how to build anything that isn't just for a quick buck. Our monuments are casinos, our temples are data centers, and our prophets are YouTubers selling affiliate links for anxiety supplements. The Roman Empire rotted away behind fancy marble walls. Ours is rotting behind 5G towers and AI, customer service bots. Rome gave its people bread and circuses to keep them distracted. America gives us DoorDash and TikTok. At least, until the algorithms start hiding reality from you and the bread gets swapped out for some ultra-processed garbage that corporate lobbyists paid for. A nation that has no moral clarity is like a ship without a rudder, and right now, we are just drifting. We're drowning in oceans of our own plastic, choking on smoky skies, and just blaming each other for a future that we all helped set on fire. So if you're asking if America is the next empire to collapse, you're asking the wrong question. The better question is, who's going to be left to rebuild it? If we ever decide we should start caring again.